what if you found a synthetic string that promised a gut-like feel? I would be very skeptical. But then you look it up on Tennis Warehouse University's string comparison tool and you realize it basically has the same stiffness as natural gut. Well, I decided to give this string a try, and well, I'll just let you have a look at my reaction when I first hit with it. Yeah, like good so far. What the hell? How is this possible? This is Ashaway Monogut ZX Pro, and yes, it does feel like gut. Although, after months of testing, I have a slightly more nuanced take on this, which is that it feels gut adjacent, like a significantly improved version of synthetic gut. Ashaway themselves like to call this man-made gut, which I kind of get where they're coming from. The TLDR here is that if you are interested in softer setups, then you need to give this a try, period. But the feel here will require some getting used to. And if you want to unlock good playability out of this string, then you need to be careful with tensions too. That's because this is not made of polyester, but rather something called ZX, which is just the trademark name for a polymer called this, or in short, PEEK. So if you're used to polys, then you need to approach this with an open mind. I myself spent several months testing this string before recording this review. This string is the second strong contender on my string journey, where my goal is to optimize a soft setup for my style of play that also maximizes the trait that I care about the most, which is ball pocketing. But ball pocketing alone does not make a string setup great. It also needs to be responsive and give me excellent control. And that control is not the pinpoint kind, but rather the directional kind that allows me to minimize my movement on court and maximize my opponent's. The rest of this video is broken up into 3 parts. In part 1, I'll try and describe the playing characteristics of the string, followed by part 2, where I'll explain how to best utilize this string, because you can't just treat it like your average tennis string, because like I said, it's not made of polyester. And I'll wrap up in part 3 by highlighting Ashaway as a company, because interestingly, they have consciously decided to stay out of the polyester space, which is why this string exists. And I want to give my 2 cents on how I see this playing out. I thought very long and hard about trying to come up with an analogy to describe what playing with a string feels like, and I think I have one. Have you ever cut vegetables or meat with a dull knife? It cuts, but you intuitively know that it's way more effort than it needs to be, and you can't really be that precise because a dull knife doesn't cut cleanly. Then you get a good knife, one that's real sharp, and man, cutting through anything really feels like cutting through room temperature butter. A dull knife is what polys feel like to me. There's a lack of refinement to them that almost forces you to use them like a blunt instrument, which is to say, lots of spin and big targets. And it's been a while since I've last hit with gut, but man does it leave a lasting impression. The only word I have to describe its feel is a scalpel. Almost everyone focuses on the feel you get from the interaction of the tennis ball with the gut string, but I never hear about just how directionally precise it feels. And that's exactly what Monogut ZX reminded me of. That feeling of being directionally precise. That feeling that you have a sharp tool in your hands, as I did when I hit with gut. It even makes the clickety-clack sound when you try and adjust the strings, same as with gut. It also sounds quite a bit different when you hit with it. It has a much sharper pitch than any other string that I've played with. And even at lower tensions, the sound that comes off the string bed is that of a string bed strung 10 pounds higher. And this is where its softness comes in. Like, I was left speechless. That's how soft the response is here. And the string did this from the beginning, when I was stringing it, and all the way to the very end, where its soft response stayed consistent throughout. I need to emphasize though that this is a completely different kind of softness because of this string's scalpel-like quality. It feels very localized. So what it feels like is that instead of the entire string bed deforming, the only part that deforms is the part that makes contact with the ball. Another thing that shocked me is when you take the string out of its package, it feels and looks exactly like a poly. But then you string it and man does this string stretch when you're pulling tension on it. Here's a clip of my reaction of when I first strung with it. Okay guys, I just wanted to show you how much this string stretches. I'm stringing my racket up right now and I'm about to turn this crank. It's pretty loose. I'm just about to turn this crank to start to tension the string. And I have my tension set at 40 pounds, which is what I'm stringing at nowadays. Okay, so this is supposed to be a polyester-like material. It's not polyester, but it looks and behaves like polyester. Like when I was taking it out of the package and feeling it, it is noticeably softer for sure, no doubt, but it's not polyester, right? And when you stretch it is really when you see that it's really not. And yeah, just have a look. Okay, so I'm gonna start tensioning it. My poly would have been stretched by now. Okay, so me turning half or a quarter of a crank is usually enough to tension it. Okay, I'm going to turn this now. Okay, so I had to go from about the 45-minute position all the way around to almost a 30-minute position. That's like on a clock that would be 45 minutes would have passed for this tension, I don't know, head or pin to pop out. That's insane. That's real flexibility. And apparently this reaction is normal. Just listen to this awesome Talk Tennis podcast from the Tennis Warehouse team that featured Steve Crandall from Ashaway.
It opens people's eyes.
Yep.
Especially a stringer, when he opens the package and he takes out the string and he goes, "Oh, that's just a poly," and then he puts the pull on it.
It pulls forever.
Like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he goes, "No, that's not a poly."
Yeah, exactly.
You would think that this much softness gives way too much power, right? And the answer here is both yes and no. It is powerful, gut-like in fact, where you have to trust your swing, but I personally never felt it was uncontrollable. At the end of the day, I think this will come down to the individual, their playing style, and the tensions you employ with the string. This tension is a pretty important factor, which I will talk about in just a bit when I talk about the string spin performance, and then again in part 2. So, comfort, check. Power, check. But this is the point where I'll start mentioning traits that for me were not a clear positive, and how big of a deal they are will depend on you, your game, and what you're looking out of your string setup. First, spin, which is average at best, unfortunately. But the very, very, very big caveat here is that this trait is extremely sensitive to the tension you string Monogut ZX at. Now, I generally string pretty low, in the 35 to 40 pounds range, which is what I initially strung the string at. And at that tension, the strings got stuck out of place in the same manner that gut strings would. But then I eventually creeped higher and higher in tension, and at around 48 pounds, I found the strings snapped back into place in the same manner that normal polyesters would. And that's when I got the spin performance to be average at best, when compared to a polyester. So tension with the string matters a lot, and I'll bring this point up again in part 2 of this review. But the only trait that really let me down was the string's responsiveness, and this is where it differentiates itself from gut. What makes natural gut so good, in my opinion, is that you don't lose any responsiveness despite its softness and the resulting increase in dwell time of the ball on the string bed. A gut string bed never feels mushy, and the ball always comes off it really fast. But this was definitely not the case with Monogut ZX. Mushy isn't the right word to describe this, but rather sluggish. The ball just felt like it got hung up in the string bed, as if it would if it was in, a really plush memory foam pillow. So while the sensation is comfortable, it's not really for someone like me who wants their string bed to be super responsive, fast, and snappy. This lack of snappy responsiveness was the deal breaker for me with Monogut ZX, at least in a full bed. But hybriding opens up a lot more possibilities. And this very appropriately brings me to part 2 of this review, where I'll tell you what, in my opinion, is the best way to play with the string. I mentioned this earlier, but this string is extremely sensitive to tension. For anyone wanting to give this a try, you have to understand that this is constructed out of a completely different material than the strings that us consumers are used to. There's a very narrow band of tensions that work for this material, and sticking to that band is how you unlock playability out of the string. I'll let Steve Crandall from Ashaway explain this.
We also had to really hone in on tensions, because people always want to know about tensions. And in this day and age, tensions, are a little bit more confusing. And so we found that you don't want to string it anywhere below 50 pounds. This is Monogut ZX full bed.
Yeah, I agree.
You really don't want to string it over 60 pounds, because then it gets stiff, because it doesn't lose tension. And really that sweet spot area is between 50 and 60, but I would even say between 54 and 57. And we find that the very best juniors in the country, the ones that have arm problems or whatever and switch to it, they like it about 57, 58, and they get 30, 40, 50 hours, when they're playing with it. But if you go down, if a player is just a recreational player, then okay, 52, 53, that would be all right. But a good player at the tension, it flies off the bat
full swings. Definitely.
It's hard to tame it.
Yeah.
So as opposed to poly, where you can string it at 20 or you can string it at 60, depending on what you're looking for, you don't have that wider range. And I think that's part of the DNA, if you will, of peak as a material, is that it has that certain area where it is the best material for a racket string of any type, closest to natural gut, and when you go on either side of that, it's too loose and it's hard to control, or it's too tight and too stiff and it's not fun to play with.
I found my experience to mirror this. Usually I string very low because that's how I get ball pocketing, which is the trait I care about the most. But at those tensions, Monogut ZX was pretty underwhelming. I eventually found 48 pounds to be my preferred tension, where I got decent responsiveness and good spin. So for anyone wanting to give this a try, I would heed Steve Crandall's advice. I also think Monogut ZX is best played as a hybrid. Part of the reason is that we're all used to what we're used to, and for some, a full bed of Monogut ZX might be too big of a change. But hey, all the power to you. If you want to give it a go for it. I wasn't able to find a hybrid that I was happy with because I ran out of sets of Monogut ZX Pro, but I did enough experiments to give me a good sense of potential pairings. In short, I think Monogut ZX is best paired with a stiffer string that's round, so think Restring Zero or Yonex Polytour Fire. I tried to hybrid this with my favorite strings like Ytex Pro Tour Blue and Gozen OG Sheep Micro, but those pairings just felt lifeless, for lack of a better word. It just felt like the strings I tried with Monogut ZX had their own natural frequencies and they didn't resonate well together. So, think like an out-of-tune guitar. I've had this theory for a while that soft strings don't pair well with other soft strings, and this just lends more credence to that theory. So based off that, I think Monogut ZX is best paired with the stiffer strings to balance its softness out. I also think you can use Monogut ZX to recreate a much cheaper version of Federer's setup with natural gut in the mains and alu power in the crosses. I plan to do a lot more experimentation around this, and I'll make a follow-up video when I have something valuable to say. At the end of the day, I think this string is best thought of as a much needed and a significant improvement to your classic synthetic gut. Ashaway also has a multi-filament line of ZX strings called Dynamite, which I've tried before and reviewed on this channel. It was my first ever review, and I'll leave it down in the description below. I want to end this review by highlighting Ashaway as a company because this string exists for a reason, which is that they don't view the proliferation of polyesters, especially among the casual fan base, as an overly positive development. If there's anything us tennis players can agree on, is that there's too many strings on the market. Choice is good, but are all the different polys on the market really that differentiated from each other? I would argue not, and this is exactly what my string journey has taught me, is that I would only rather try strings that clearly offer a differentiated experience. Let's hear from Steve Crandall from Ashaway one last time.
Do you think the poly universe is so overfilled with redundant options that it makes more sense to devote your energy to Monogut ZX?
Exactly. Without a doubt, the long term would be, there is some confusion with people buying the Monogut thinking that it's the Monogut ZX.
Right.
And being very disappointed, obviously. And I think the poly segment is, saturated. That's probably a good word for it. And from a marketing perspective, I think our going forward marketing of Monogut ZX, the hybrid capabilities of Monogut ZX, the Dynamite, and our Kevlars, as you pointed out, that's really our niche in the tennis market going forward. We make an inexpensive nylon Liberty here in the States, and we sell quite a bit of it. It's probably the least expensive, tournament nylon on the market.
I think it is
made in the USA. We'll continue to make that, But for us to try and compete in the polyester market that's dominated by so many other players, it just doesn't really make sense for Ashaway long term.
I mean, I think the one fact that we can all agree on, I hope, is that there are too many polyester strings out there.
Yes, I agree.
Now, I have a lot of experience with Ashaway because I also play squash, and my string of choice in that sport is also from Ashaway. So I hold the brand in high regard. But this is an interesting stance for two reasons. One is that if I was a string manufacturer, I would have taken the exact same approach that Ashaway has taken, which is to come out with a differentiated product to avoid being lost in the sea of sameness that the current string market finds itself in. And that's even more so the case if you do truly have a unique product, which is the case here. But the second opposing point is that when you have a truly differentiated product, you have to have marketing horsepower behind it. That's what Restring and Tourline have done, which is to get their strings in the hands of a few key influencers who seem to believe in their product, and then match that with incentives that keep them promoting it. There's no such marketing efforts behind Monogut ZX, and it's not keeping up with the times. Just as an example, you can go to Ashaway's website and you'll land on a webpage that looks right out of the dial-up internet era. This does not do Ashaway any favors, and this is despite the fact that the information on their website is good, clear, and well laid out, and in a tabular format, thank God, because that makes it easy to look through their offerings and compare them. Despite looking old, this is a breath of fresh air when compared with, for example, Solinco's or Tourline's dogshit websites that make it absolutely frustrating to look through all of their offerings and compare them to see what each one may or may not offer or whether they might be suitable to you. And I'm not picking on Solinco or Tourline here. Almost every racket sports brand is guilty of doing the exact same thing and making it incredibly frustrating to navigate and look through their offerings. I think the best practices for the string, such as knot tying or the tension ranges that Steve Crandall talked about on the Talk Tennis podcast, should be front and center on both the website and the packaging, but it's not. All it says here is that you can string this up to 60 pounds in tension, which is what every other manufacturer would say on their string packaging too. I shouldn't have to listen to an hour-long podcast to figure this out. There is a 7+ minute video on their website on how to string with this string, but why is there no QR code on this packaging that would direct a consumer to that video? And moreover, why should I have to watch that entire thing when it should be a 10-second read on just the packaging? And I haven't even touched on effective marketing through social media channels like Instagram. So despite Ashaway having a product that the vast majority of the tennis fan base should try, I don't think it will happen if things stay the way they are currently. But hopefully this video of mine encourages you to give it a try, and hopefully we can move the needle a bit. But this current state is not set in stone. Ashaway, if you're watching, this is not meant to be harsh. I truly care about seeing good differentiated products succeed because we consumers deserve that. At the end of the day, you just need champions to effectively market, advocate for your products, and more importantly, educate people about them.